Chemtrails? What are chemtrails?
Chemical trails, Daddy, and they're very bad.
Welcome to the first broadcast of GeoEngineering Watch Radio. This program will keep you up to date with the latest and most important information regarding geoengineering, its consequences, and how it is affecting our lives on a daily basis. Our regular hosts on this program are Dave Wigington, Richard Sachs, and Russ Tanner, all of whom will be sharing information not only about geoengineering, but about other related subjects, such as the way we can keep ourselves healthy despite all of the spraying. This program is being broadcast at 11 a.m. Pacific Time and 2 p.m. Eastern Time from ucy.tv. Just visit ucy.tv and click Shows, and then click Geoengineering Watch. This is a 2-hour program, and during the second hour, we'll be taking your calls. We want to give a special thanks to Dodie and Jules for their tireless work in getting this program off the ground. Truly, without their tireless, ongoing efforts in making this happen, it never would have gotten off the ground. And without any other delay, I want to introduce Dane Wigington from geoengineeringwatch.org.
Thank you, Russ. Thanks for all the effort you put into this as well. People should know that things like this don't happen without a whole lot of pulling together. And with Russ's technical end and help on that, and expertise of Richard Sachs as well, we hope to be able to roundtable and connect a lot of peripheral subjects with the issue of geoengineering, but to also point out on a regular updated basis the events that are unfolding around this issue. We have forests collapsing in the Pacific Northwest. We have issues with farmland and other parts of the U.S., drought and deluge, all the things we would expect with geoengineering. And quite simply, this show is meant to help on a continual basis to expose the gravity of stratospheric aerosol geoengineering. All of us are being affected. None of us are exempt from this. And quite simply, the gravity of this issue cannot be overstated. If this issue is not dealt with, we believe, based on all available data, that nothing else will matter. So we hope to keep this relaxed and a very informal format. It's basically a roundtable discussion, and we absolutely welcome calls in the second hour. We'll try to answer any and all questions and keep the dialogue going on this issue and try to elaborate on how all of us must help with this endeavor. We are all part of the same team. All rides on this issue, regardless of all the challenges we face. If we continue to breathe in these toxic metals with every breath, we quite simply won't be fighting many battles for long. So, again, thanks to Jules, thanks to Dodie, without whom this show would not have happened, and also to you, Russ, and to Richard. So, without further delay, I think if we can dive into the subject of how bad is it right now. Russ, what are you seeing up in your area? You're on Maine. You're in Maine. I'm in California. Let's compare some notes, and how are things up your way?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm near Bangor, Maine. It's pretty thick here. We don't always see the long plumes. A couple of years ago, they suddenly overnight switched to spraying short plumes all the time, but it still leaves the same odors in the air, the same metallic taste that some of the sensitive people can taste. I'm tasting it and smelling it as I sit here. It's been on us all morning. But it's been, as far as the intensity of that in the air, it's been a pretty average type of day. We have it 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Rarely, maybe once every 2 months, is there an hour or two where the air becomes almost completely clear. So it's pretty much an average day here, but is causing symptoms, and these metals are accumulating in people. So it's, even though it's not a super intense day, this is an accumulative process of metals.
What do you see in Arizona, Richard?
I'm up in northern Arizona, and yesterday we had the sky completely turned white by spraying. And today, for some reason, they don't seem to be spraying at all yet this morning, and the sky still has a little bit of white tinge to it from yesterday, and blue is trying to show through that.
Richard, most people might not know who you are yet. I mean, you've been below the radar a bit, but you bring a tremendous amount to the table, a tremendous amount of knowledge and perspective, and maybe you could tell listeners a bit about your experience with this issue and what brought you to the place where you knew it needed to be addressed, and a little bit about yourself.
Well, briefly, Dane, I guess the short version of that is that I'm a researcher and teacher in holistic health, and I've been involved in that since about 1965 or so, almost 50 years. And particularly interested in preventing and curing, not managing, but curing incurable and chronic diseases, and reversing aging, and issues like that really interest me. What's required for people to stay in their normal state of health, which is almost never seen these days, but is still possible. And when I say holistic health, I'm saying that refers to the idea that everything is connected. And so my study of health led me into environmental studies starting in the mid-'60s. And as part of that, I was fortunate to meet authors of a book called The Survival of Civilization about that time, and that dealt with levels of gases and their ratios in the atmosphere, including carbon dioxide, which has been the topic of a lot of discussion, among the global warming people and people talking about climate disruption. So I was really looking at those things starting in the mid-'60s, but we didn't see any chemtrails at that time for probably another 30 years until I became aware of that. So my background is in connecting the dots and a bigger overview of the system and how all these things can be brought back to a normal state of health. And in the process of that, I had to become aware of what was going on that was preventing that. Certainly chemtrails would be a big issue now, but it's tied to so many other issues that connecting the dots is an ongoing process for me. And I spent about 10 years during that process in an in-depth study of the political and economic power structure that is currently running this country and most of the world. So to me, all that...
I think at this point it does seem there's a core group. This is something a lot of people are just starting to come to grips with, that there does in fact seem to be a core group of global elite that pull all the strings. Would you not agree?
I really would. The way that I've approached this investigation is with no preconceptions. I have no party affiliation, no labels to defend. I'm only interested in whatever seems to be true and to understand it. And I've had to come to the conclusion that there is a very small group that is greatly responsible for almost all of the things that all of us are struggling with right now, including benefits.
And then on the health issue, and I know, Russ, you have a background here on the holistic health end as well, but it's important that we continually try to chelate these metals out of our systems. This question can go to both of you, but also in the course of doing that, primarily we must stop the continual exposure to the source. And the greatest source of the contamination on the planet as a whole right now, all data indicates, is by far geoengineering. So with the constant saturation of these particulates, it's imperative we continue to chelate, but also to stop the exposure to the source? And that question can go to either one of you.
Russ, why don't you take that?
Go ahead. Well, I totally agree. I mean, some very quick tips that I use and I pass out on my channels that I communicate with people on are, for instance, malic acid. Malic acid actually chelates aluminum out of the body, and it's a very effective way to chelate aluminum out of the body, which is very important because, of course, geoengineering contains a massive amount of aluminum. All evidence suggests by the soil and rainwater tests and dust tests that we have from all over the United States and Europe. So malic acid is one very effective way to do that. And of course, getting aluminum, if you're dealing with nanoparticle aluminum, it's very dangerous because nanoparticle aluminum can accumulate in capillaries and lead to strokes and aneurysms and heart attacks. It's very, very dangerous. We should never be exposed to this as we are now. And as someone who has a very sensitive sense of smell and taste, that's probably one of the main things that got me into this issue is because I smell and taste it, and it's a daily barrage. It's just a horrible, horrible experience that I have to go through daily in smelling and tasting this. And so I know it's in the air. You don't see it. People don't recognize that it's there, which is part of the reason for the show. But it is there, and it's very, very dangerous. Russell Blaylock has done a lot of, he's a doctor, a very well-known doctor who has exposed many issues, and one of them is geoengineering. He talks about how nanoparticle aluminum is very inflammatory. And I'm one of the lucky ones that has an inflammatory reaction to the spraying. So if not everyone does, but I have a pretty dramatic reaction. So this inflammation can also cause numerous problems in the body as well. So malic acid is one quick, very effective tip for dealing with aluminum. I'll mention one other thing too. I mean, this is a big subject we could talk for hours on, but one other tip I'll give is algin. Algin is in my opinion, the single most important detox supplement that you can take. It's a non-digestible polysaccharide. It's an extract from brown seaweed, and it actually binds to barium, strontium, mercury, and other heavy metals in the intestines. And the reason this is so important is because your body will reabsorb these metals. When your body gets rid of them via the liver, it dumps them out through the bile ducts into your intestines, and then your intestines will dutifully reabsorb them. So the way that you can prevent that reabsorption is by taking algin, and algin absorbs and prevents that redistribution of those metals that your body's trying to get rid of. So it's extremely effective in my experience. And of course, I'm not a doctor and I don't prescribe, dose, cure symptoms, conditions, or diseases. All I do is share information that I've learned through my personal experience and research. Nevertheless, algin and malic acid are two great tips for dealing with chemical aerosols that we're experiencing right now.
On that note, Russ and Richard, we can go into continued things people do to keep themselves healthy. I mean, we all know that's important, and everybody wants to know that. They want to know that they're not helpless. There are things they can do. But I think to drive home right now, how bad is it? How bad is this situation? Is this just one more peripheral issue that we need to deal with, or is this, in fact, the primary issue that if it's not dealt with, again, all else becomes moot? And I would, if I can briefly point out to people, again, the state of affairs that we are in right now, that is being talked about finally, even in the White House, that there is so much atmospheric spraying going on that, again, the global dimming latest statistic is 22%. 22% of the sun's direct rays are no longer reaching the surface of the planet. There was an emergency meeting in the White House, I think, 13, 14 days ago about the fact that we're seeing huge climate mechanisms kick into gear now. And of course, we would expect this when people play God with the weather for 60-plus years. I mean, what gave them the right? What gives them the right to play God with the weather and the planet's life support systems? So now what we have, they're experimenting with the atmosphere is so incredibly decimating and destructive that now we have, again, species extinction rate that are approaching 10,000 times background extinction. That's 200 species plus a day. We have autism going off the charts, Alzheimer's going off the charts. We have forests that are virtually crashing. Here in the Pacific Northwest, the forest is silent. We just did a terrestrial insect survey about a week ago with a U.S. Forest Service biologist. 90% decline in forest terrestrial insects as of a week ago. 90% decline in aquatic insects in the Northern California Shasta-Siskiyou tributaries. We're talking about a virtual crash. We're in the 6th great mass extinction right now. We have respiratory issues going off the charts. We have, again, a long list of diseases, too long to even begin to go into, almost all of which can be traced back to exposure to heavy metals. We have cropland that's no longer productive because it's been saturated with these metals. We have weather conditions that are horrific, and we have, again, this is very important to make people understand, aside from the subject of global warming as a whole and the causes, and again, not about Al Gore, because I don't think any of us like Al Gore, but these geoengineering programs have indeed triggered catastrophic climate feedback mechanisms, and people need to separate the baby from the bathwater. They need to get Al Gore out of the equation and realize geoengineering has completely decimated the climate system. And now there's an emergency meeting at the White House, again, as of 2 weeks ago, trying to discuss how to hide the fact that we're going to have an ice-free Arctic this year or next, 100 years ahead of modeling, methane spewing from the Arctic. They're spraying even more to try to compensate, apparently doubling down. So I would like, in fact, Richard, your take from your perspective in Arizona on how bad it is and just how critical our situation is. I would be curious of your thoughts.
Well, I completely support what the image that you're giving, Dane. I think it's pretty serious. I was out on a trail the other day in kind of a wild area, and I noticed it was very quiet, and I couldn't see any animals running around. There was virtually no wildlife. And in fact, now that you mention it, almost no insects and no lizards or anything like that usually running all over the desert. I'm in the high desert here, about 4,000 something feet. And, there's just a really obvious decline in all areas of wildlife. The trees here are pretty tough, and they haven't been showing the signs that the forests in your area are yet, but it's definitely quieter than it should be. There's some birds, but almost nothing else. I think it's extremely serious, and it's also really clear from a health perspective that with the obvious direct results of breathing this stuff, the upper respiratory diseases and things like that, the doctors are reporting that those are very elevated, and all kinds of conditions that can be associated with breathing things that you shouldn't be breathing. So I would say it's very serious, and even with that, I don't think we've seen the real appearance of the severity of how it is yet, and I think that's likely to appear rather suddenly, and it's going to surprise people.
Yeah, it's coming down very quickly, and this is what people need to understand, that this is not a linear equation. People tend to want to look backward at how long it's taken to get to a certain point and think that we can base our trajectory forward on that, and that just simply does not hold true. There are so many aspects of this equation that are completely non-linear, and when crashes happen, they happen very quickly. That's why the term crash. So, again, the change we've seen here in the Pacific Northwest is absolutely profound, and even though some areas of the country are being deluged with record rain, we are under record drought here. It's the driest start to the year ever recorded. We had the driest fall ever recorded in 2012, driest January, February ever recorded. Once you start to screw with the system, once you start to saturate the atmosphere with these particulates, the entire hydrological cycle is thrown off. And I think, Russ, you guys have had quite a bit of wet this year up in Maine, right?
Yeah. This is the first year we've actually seemed to have been allowed to have any considerable amount of rain here. Yeah, we've seen them just block front after front in previous years for years. They spray real heavily when a front's coming in, and they predict rain. And it was an ongoing joke here because it wouldn't rain. They predict rain, wouldn't rain, predict rain. And this pattern went on for a couple of years. And then the last year they changed it. Now we've been getting quite a bit.
Well, it seems the experiment is always ongoing. These guys are like kids in a sandbox that just, if one thing doesn't seem to be working right, they do another when none of it's working right overall. But the same thing's happening here in the Pacific Northwest, where I live. In the last 7 years, we are almost 200 inches of rain short. So as they saturate the west, they migrate this moisture in, they float it right over the top of us. and it continues to wherever they choose to drop it in a very haphazard way. So we're seeing the same things here, and I think the Southwest, Richard, it's pretty dry down there as well, yeah?
It's pretty dry, but the terrain and the vegetation is different. Instead of the pines and firs that you have there, we've got junipers and piñons that are kind of tough and scrubby by comparison. And this is generally an area that is not expected to be very wet. The main issue that I've seen here really is the effect on the ground with the disappearing wildlife at this point.
Yeah, it's disappearing all over. And even with the piñons and the junipers, and I formerly lived in the Wallapai Mountains of western Arizona, and the die-off there was really beginning in earnest in the late 90s. We were seeing 500-year-old trees die faster than I could cut them down. And what I found there that was interesting is as I began to inquire with various agencies like the BLM and Department of Interior, so many of these agencies have paid stooges that just, their job is to say everything's fine, everything's normal, nothing unusual here, and go back to sleep. And this is something people need to realize, that just because some agency says something's okay certainly doesn't mean that it is. Just like all the agencies that said it was okay in the Gulf of Mexico, it's all safe, go back to your activities and fishing, and it's all good. And we know now that this is nothing but a lie. And I think, Richard, you have some knowledge, I think, on the Gulf situation down there too, which I'd like you to elaborate on. But people need to understand that geoengineering is sort of the Corexit cure for planet Earth. And if they don't know what Corexit is, that's the dispersant that people, or that BP used on the Gulf oil spill, which made the whole situation, by some reports, 52 times more toxic. So it's important people understand that those in power could give a damn about us, our health, the environment, the planet. They simply want to experiment with anything, everything, regardless of the consequences, and they'll do anything to cover it up, regardless of the consequences. So, I mean, on the would you say that that's an accurate statement, Richard?
Well, first of all, I think it's a great analogy with Corexit and chemtrails, or geoengineering, because, the Corexit was only, as far as I can see, really for only a couple of purposes. One was to make the oil sink so it wouldn't be visible from the top and wouldn't be so embarrassing, and they could just not have to discuss it so much with the public. And the other thing was the Corexit is an intense poison, and it poisons the whole food chain, from the bottom right up to humans, and it's been very effective at that. So I don't think that was a failure. I think it was a success. It just had a different goal than what was announced, and I think the chemtrails are exactly the same way. As far as the people not caring about humanity, I think it's a multi-tiered system, and the people who are helping carry this out in the mid to upper levels are mostly just really happy they've been given free rein to do these crazy experiments. But the ones at the top who are directing them are doing it quite intentionally, and it's not that they don't care about us. This is directed at humans, and it's directed at the biosphere, and I don't think the intent is positive.
No, I don't think it is either in regard to those at the very top, but I think also that they are, at least or till now, been able to comprehend the total consequences of what they're doing, because they've always gotten away with it. I mean, detonating 1,800 nuclear bombs and all the other things that the collective insanity does, they've always gotten away with it. But now, at this point, I'm seeing what I believe to be fractures in the power structure, that these people are now in a panic. They realize they've torpedoed their own ship, if you will, and they're trying desperately to put a toxic Band-Aid on the hole, and it's only making things exponentially worse. It's how we got here. So, the Russ, in the forest of your way, is it getting quiet? Because it's like a ghost forest here. I mean, you might hear the occasional sick frog, and every tree looks like it's hanging by a thread. There's trees flashing out dead all over. No birds. We usually see groups of 30, 40, 50 turkeys. I see nothing. So, I mean, are things quiet up that way, or has the rain kept it going a bit?
No, there's been there's been some mixed things. In the bees. I mean, as geoengineering increased in intensity, I saw the bees die off. I saw the very first year I experienced it back in 2005. The bees died off the very following year. The very next summer, the bees were almost completely gone. I mean, it looked to me.
Russ, you can continue on with the bees, but isn't it incredible how there's always a red herring with the bees and with other situations? With the climate, it's cow flatulence that's causing the methane when we know it's methane spewing from the seafloor, and with the bees, it's some chemical that's been around forever that's suddenly killing all the bees, even in regions 1,000 miles into the wilderness. But what's your thoughts on that? The red herrings that the media picks to try to take our eye off the ball, and certainly geoengineering is by far the elephant in the room that's contaminating everything everywhere, and people need to look past the media spin. Yeah.
Oh, I totally agree. And this is a great subject because you begin talking about deception. Because here's the thing. People don't want to believe that this is going on. Your typical person who's living their life and wants to have a family and have a job and do their things and live their life out don't want to believe this. And what happens is the powers that be through mainstream media provide a way for people to comfortably disregard all the warnings that we are giving about this. So they'll say, like you said, cow flagellants, or they'll say this, that, or the other, or swamp gas is making Venus look such and such. They'll come up with anything so that people don't have to face this reality of what's really going on. So yeah, I believe these are what I call cover stories in a sense, that they try to they just provide an excuse for people to dismiss the urgency of this whole situation. And this is going on all the time. They're blaming the bees on a pesticide, for instance. That's one thing that I mean, we had no pesticide use in our residential area that I know of at all. And I saw the bees die off the year immediately following the winter that geoengineering started in that area. So is that a just massive coincidence? Same thing happened during 3 weeks of massive spraying in the Bangor area. We lost an entire ladybug colony, all dead, all over the ground. They just died. 3 days, 3 days of intense, and they all died. And this was a colony that has been here since anyone can remember. Massive coincidence? Pesticide? No. There's a very good explanation for it. So I completely agree with you that, really in the scope of things, this is the elephant in the middle of the room, and they're just trying to provide excuses so people don't have to deal with this.
And you said something important, Russ, to keep people's eye off the urgency of the situation. You feel it's very urgent. Richard, I think you and I are on the same page also as far as just how immediate our situation is. So, what your thoughts on that? I mean, on time frames of, I know it's hard to nail down particulars, but your perspectives on just how close the convergence of all these catastrophes is and just how critical our situation is.
Go ahead, Russ. You first.
Oh, well, I just completely agree with Dane. I mean, this is the number one issue of our time right now. I personally, and I know people who have heard me say this over and over again, but I'm going to keep saying it because there are a lot of new people listening, and you need to hear this. And I know that a lot of people have experienced what I'm about to say. In the first year that geoengineering started in the area that I lived in, more people I know who died passed away in that first year than in the rest of my life combined and doubled. And they were largely heart attacks, strokes, aneurysms, and cancer. Those are the big four things. I even had relatives write me emails that just said, oh my God, what is going on? In response to the fact that so many people were getting sick, getting diseases, getting cancers, having aneurysms, having strokes, having heart attacks. And they just wrote, oh my God, what is going on? And I'll never forget this because other people are looking for explanations, but they're afraid to face this. This is the elephant in the middle of the room. This is the issue of the century, or the issue of all time. It is one great irony is a wonderful woman from Georgia who we often have contact with, and she's reporting geoengineering to her local authorities and dealing with them and educating them about this, is they have a burn ban in part of Georgia because they want to cut down on air pollution. And she was just angry, justifiably so, about this because this is just another tactic to get people to believe that they're doing everything that they can to keep the pollution down. A burn ban to keep pollution down, so you can't burn stuff on your own property, while they're dumping how many tens of tons of toxic metals in the atmosphere and in the skies over her property every day. It's just, this is the issue of our time. Richard?
It is. And again, the expediency this is coming down with, people need to understand, we're not talking about something unfolding over centuries or decades, but it's here now. It's unfolding now. The door is being broken down right now. And again, on time frames, I mean, I feel that we are on the cusp of them not being able to hide this much longer. That alone will change the entire situation. So, I mean, I feel that our entire paradigm will be turned on its head in a very short time frame. Richard, your thoughts on that?
I think if you use the analogy of the clock, that we're minutes to midnight, and it's not large numbers of years. I think if we're lucky, we haven't passed the point of no return yet, but I'm not sure about that, whether we have or not. And we have to do our best regardless, because, especially if we don't know that fact. And I really think that the only chance, if there is one, for the survival of humanity on this planet is to act very quickly, starting immediately. As far as time frames before it's too late, I think that could be any time from right now through the next maybe 2 or 3 years at the most. I don't see it going beyond that.
And too late is a big term also, and I think based on data that we see right now, I think all available data supports this, that we are indeed past the point of no return in regard to a planet that's much different than the one we have known. Geoengineering has decimated the natural system so much so that these climate feedback loops have kicked in, and I based on paleo data, based on previous events in the Earth's history, once certain wheels are turning, they take a certain course. And I believe, based on what I see, that we are the data that's available, again, from all available science sources. And the power structure knows this too. That's why they're having emergency meetings in the White House, how to hide this. And hiding it, they're trying to hide the fact that we've all been lied to horrifically and constantly over decades. And now the lump won't fit under the rug, and now they're trying to figure out how they hide it from here on out. But based on the data on events that are unfolding now, anybody that's heard or look at some of the data of recent events, we have methane mass expulsion happening in the Arctic. We have massive ozone destruction going on, related to geoengineering on both counts. So these guys have meddled with the very delicate life support systems of the planet so much so that now they have derailed the train, and the train is going to crash to some degree. I think the question now is, if we don't stop the ongoing meddling, the ongoing experimentation, all will be lost, and the planet will quite simply not be able to support life. And I feel that's how serious it is. So for those that want to think that if we just turn this switch off, everything will go back to normal, I believe we're well past that point. However, we certainly could still have a planet that supports life, and that should be our priority number one. And I think that again, geoengineering comes to the top of the list as far as the single greatest causal factor for planetary disruption, climate disruption, planetary contamination. I mean, we have enough data to confirm that total contamination of the planet, from the sky to the ground, the waters, everything, absolutely everything. So in the coming couple of years, Richard, what would you say? I mean, we have other factors coming into play now, too, that are in a peripheral sense connected to geoengineering, the power structure, and so forth. I just heard somebody say that they saw a report that Brzezinski mentioned that there was a fracturing in the power structure going on, which is certainly in our favor. Have you heard anything along those lines?
I've been going on, but it's fighting. Can you hear me now?
We lost audio for a minute. Go ahead.
Okay. I've been aware of fractures within the higher levels of the power structure for many years, and they've been fighting pretty constantly, because that's their nature, over who's going to get to be the supreme ruler over everything. But they're not fighting about whether to, what they want to do to us. That's pretty much unanimously agreed. And I think geoengineering and chemtrails are part of it. But I think that, my viewpoint is from a healing point of view. And I think that if things were started immediately, I mean, certainly the first requirement would be to stop the damage. You have to stop these airplanes from flying, or there's no point in doing much of anything else. And you have to stop a number of other things, too. This is not the only thing going on. And then once those things are corrected, there are healing measures that can be applied to the earth just like they could to a human body. But you know, if you want to heal a human, you can't have them on a terrible diet and try to give them vitamins. It just, you know, it won't fix everything that way. It's the same with this. You have to stop the spraying, regardless of what people claim is the reason for it. And then you can address healing measures to try to save as much of the biosphere as possible.
And allow the biosphere to begin to heal itself. I mean, I fully agree. That's should be obvious at this point. The planet has made it how far on its own through how many different massive events, from meteor impacts to all sorts of other things, and it's always sustained life. So it certainly must be considered the epitome of human insanity to think they could possibly fly thousands of jets around the globe, day in, day out, dumping tens of millions of tons of toxic materials into the sky and do anything but harm. Anything but harm. And now let's add HAARP to the mix, and we have a giant mess. And it just seems that this is the insanity in its most direct form, that to think that they could keep doing the same thing on an ever bigger scale and get a different result. The result is destruction. The more they ramp these programs up, the more destruction we have. And quite simply, at this point, all is at stake. The planet's life support systems are literally breaking down by the day, and the planet must be allowed to respond. And this, for people to understand, I think a lot of people have just heard we just passed the 400 part per billion count of carbon. And again, not relating this to Al Gore or his schemes, but the planet has been through eras like this as recently as about 5 million years ago, the Pliocene epoch. That there's very parallel circumstances, and people need to understand this. We have very good models of what should be happening, but what's not. So instead of, as in the Pliocene, where we had increased carbon, increased warming, and increased rainfall, which starts to tilt the scale back the other way, the planet starts to rejuvenate itself, as you just said, Richard. It starts to heal itself. But that's being thwarted. It's being completely blocked from, the planet's being blocked from trying to respond. It's been blocked for the last 60 years. So, indeed, it can't heal itself. It can't try to recover or reach equilibrium when it's being completely put in a straitjacket and unable to respond. Correct?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. And you know, there are a few different levels of this that are important to understand in some detail. One is that if people on a mass scale become aware of geoengineering and chemtrails and what they're actually doing, which you've been detailing, then they can put pressure on the so-called representatives and try to do something that way. And that can help to some degree. But there are two other levels that we need to look at. One is the low to middle level people involved. And those are, for example, the people flying the airplanes. And certainly it can't happen without their help. And many of them are not, you know, incredibly malevolent people. They're just more comfortable doing their job and getting a lot of money for it than thinking about the effects. And one of the things that this show might be able to hope to do as it gets bigger is to reach some of those people and get them to question what they're doing and consider stopping. And then there's the level at the top, which is paying for this to be done. And they know the destruction. They are not idiots. That would be a big mistake for us to assume. And they're doing it intentionally. I don't think we're going to get them to change their minds. But the people that they depend on to do the work, many of those pilots and the support people and they keep the system going, I think many of them could be reachable. And if they understand they're cutting off their own life support system, we might get some unexpected help from that area.
I think they're reachable, and I don't think they understand the global cataclysm they're causing. But I certainly don't feel that, and you're not saying this, but that they're completely unaware of what they're participating in. I think they're being told they're doing some benevolent act of, you know, some planet-saving program, which couldn't be further from the truth. But in contrast to, for example, a piece that Ed Griffin just wrote that was titled "Don't Blame the Pilots," where Ed implied that the pilots, none of them would possibly have a clue for anything that's going on here. And I would question that as well. It's not that I blame all of the pilots or think that they all know, but certainly if a large and ever-growing percentage of the population knows, we know people within these programs know. I personally spoke to a representative from Jebsen Aviation, that's a subsidiary of Boeing, Jepsen does all global flight coordination. And with this Jepsen person, I kept the subject light for 15 minutes, mentioned the word geoengineering, and he literally turned his back and walked away from me. Clearly, he knew what he was involved with. But apparently the job, as you said, was more important to him than the damage he was doing or the horrific programs he was involved with. So, yeah, I think it's imperative we do get that word out, and everybody needs to help with getting that word out so that those involved with these programs understand that they are pounding the nails into their collective coffins along with the rest of us. So I would agree with that. And those on the top, again, I think we're dealing with insanity that at some level believes they can do this and get away with it. I mean, we've seen, I think, Russ, you've talked about this before, we've seen how much conditioning they've done with putting these trails in films, kids' animated films. You've seen a lot of that, haven't you, Russ?
Well, not only are they putting them in kids' films and cartoons and in movies, but now they're in textbooks. In fact, we just put up an article about a textbook that talks about the trails, whether persistent or non-persistent. There's also the NASA cloud chart that shows all of these clouds that are really remnants. I call it geoengineering fallout, or geoengineering artifacts. These are these structures that appear in the sky that appear, maybe an hour to 3 or 4 hours after the sky's been sprayed. And they have pictures of these, and they've named them, and they're calling them clouds, and they're teaching the school children that this is just, there's no mention that these are artificial. These are just natural clouds they're teaching.
That's a great point you bring up. People need to understand that. Just because it shows something in a textbook doesn't mean it's accurate. I mean, history is written by the victor. And at this point, these guys are making up reality as they go. And these aerosol clouds, which so many people consider just normal cloud cover because they've been exposed to it for so long, the cloud should be white, the sky should be blue. And even upper-level stratocirrus should still be white. And again, at this point, they're melting such massive areas of cloud together that you can hardly make out a natural cloud from the rest of the toxic aerosol canopy. Or if you see backdrops toward the horizon, you'll see the outline of some natural cumulus clouds, but this huge backdrop of silvery white. And if you block the sun out with something, there's a big halo around it. And people need to understand it takes a lot of metal to block 22% of the sun's direct rays, and that's what we have right now. And the situation is getting more serious by the day. But based on the fact that they've put this stuff in kids' books and films and in fact, I think they made it a point. We've seen big box office Hollywood productions going back to the 60s with trails in the sky. Now, I don't believe they were added. We know these programs have been going on since as far back perhaps as the late 40s, quite a bit of documentation to back that up. So I simply think they made it a point to be in the background for some of these big box office productions so that they would have a record to say, see, it's always been there. Because we know these programs were on a small scale then. But it just shows the arrogance that it seems they felt they could do this forever without consequence, and so they were trying to condition the population to just be used to seeing this, and in fact there's huge consequences, and that's unfolding now. So I don't think they could continue on with this, and again with phrasing the power structure, Richard, I mean, anything else that's on your horizon you're seeing recent things that are indicating that the system is sort of splintering?
Yeah, a couple of things. First of all, I wanted to make an analogy with the incident that you just talked about with the man turning and walking away from you from the aviation company. I think there's a parallel between the de facto ranks, you might say, in the people involved in geoengineering, people involved at different responsibility levels, and a military structure. And in some cases, they're actually overlapping or the same. But I know that I have a lot of friends in the military, many of whom have gone to the Middle East to do what they thought was fighting for freedom. It turned out to be, murder and drug dealing. But they weren't aware of that when they went. But a lot of these people, once they get there and they're given a sense of power, even doing a destructive job, and it connects to the ego in a way that there's an identification that takes place, and sometimes with some of them, some kind of an incident strikes them and breaks the trance. And I know we've seen some soldiers coming back from very nasty missions where they were actually killing families that didn't do anything, And they woke up because of that, and they suddenly started speaking out against what is not really fighting for freedom, but is something really different. And it's the same within the chemtrails power structure that is carrying on these projects. And I think that at some point they can be struck by a realization that just suddenly makes them turn around, and we might be able to hope to be part of that. As far as the structure part right now, or showing more signs of division, I think that that's happening on a really wide scale throughout society, because many of these issues are coming to a head at once. Even if chemtrails or geoengineering is the most important in some ways, there are others that are immediate threats to the survival of humanity. And I just watched a video this morning of 50-some sheriffs in Colorado who are members of the power structure there getting together to file a lawsuit against the governor. And it doesn't matter that it's on a different issue, unconstitutional gun laws that they're not going to accept. The important point there is that they were able to break the programming that they have to follow the power structure no matter what. And they're not just not participating, they're turning around and filing suit against their superiors. And I think the same thing could potentially happen within the chemtrails power structure.
You know, that's encouraging to hear that going on. And we saw some sort of legislation or a proposal for legislation passed through recently that was or is an attempt to try to get federal authority to arrest sheriffs if they don't carry out federal mandates. And so I think the fight is growing on every front. And on that fraying of the power structure again, when the lump doesn't fit under the rug back in regards to geoengineering, I'm going to read a headline right now this is from The Guardian, so this is from mainstream media, and this is about 10 days old, something like that. Again, headline on The Guardian: White House warned on imminent Arctic death spiral. National security officials worried by rapid loss of Arctic summer sea ice overlook the threat of permanent global food shortages. This is where people need to understand, back to geoengineering again. Why would they do this? I mean, they're trying to manipulate food supplies. They're trying to render soils unable to grow anything but Monsanto's genetically modified seeds. There's weather warfare going on. And what's interesting is this is below a caption there on the headline still says, the melting of sea ice in the Arctic has caught the eye of the U.S. Department of Homeland Security and the Pentagon. Well, why wouldn't it? When there's not enough to go around, we're going to have Katrina on a scale 1,000-fold. And then let's go to the 1.6 billion or 2 billion 40 caliber hollow points that's been purchased by Homeland Security, whatever that amount is. And as unrelated as it might seem, that likely relates to geoengineering, the decimation of the climate, the lack of the planet to produce enough food now, and the riots that will ensue because of that. And so all these issues are indeed related. And, for example, when the geoengineering lump won't fit under the rug anymore, and the population as a whole realizes they've been sprayed like lab rats, they're all part of a massive experiment without their knowledge or consent, and that little Johnny's autism and Granny's Alzheimer's is from these programs, and that their own ailments and sickness are from these programs. I think the population's going to be looking for their pitchforks and torches, and so Homeland Security is gearing up for this. And quite simply, in this one issue alone, when they can't hide the fact that they've been geoengineering the hell out of the climate and we've all been breathing what they've been spraying, I think the natives are going to be pretty restless. What do you think, Russ?
Yeah, I absolutely believe that is what they're gearing up for. There's no question that they're monitoring. They passed all this legislation to monitor communication. They passed legislation to gear up for domestic uprisings. Lots of purchasing of military-style policing equipment. You know, the writing's on the wall, and they know this ahead of time. And as much as people who are listening to us don't want to believe it, of course, I think we're preaching to the choir to a large degree, because a lot of people who are listening know, but there are a lot of new people. We're seeing an influx of people and an acceptance of this that we've never seen before. It is growing quicker. Awareness of geoengineering is growing faster than ever before. So those people who are listening, who are looking for answers, look at the writing on the wall. Look at the stuff that is being purchased. Look at the the legislation and the executive orders that are preparing the government for a massive internal uprising. What do they know? What are they preparing for? They're preparing for something. And I totally agree with you, Dane. It is related to geoengineering, because geoengineering is going to wipe out our food supply. And then we're going to have real domestic uprisings and problems when there is no food.
Yeah, and those problems will ensue very, very quickly. And again, I would argue at the moment in time that the critical mass of the public understands that we are all in free fall off the end of the plank. Or in fact, if we were in free fall off a 100-story building, we're passing the second story right now, and the sidewalk's the next stop. Once the paradigm is shattered, then I think the panic sets in quite quickly. And I think we're very, very close to that point where they can't hide the gravity of our situation and the fact that they've done these tests on all of us. They've, in a large degree, to a large degree, they've pounded the nails into our collective coffins here by doing the experimentation that they've done without anybody's knowledge or consent. And I think at that point, when there's enough public awareness of this, the whole game changes. I mean, psychologically, is that, Richard, would you agree with that once a critical percentage of the population understands that they've all been subjected to these experiments that have now altered the very state of the planet, its ability to produce food, and we are at that point now. I mean, it's unfolding now, but at the point in time enough people realize that changes the whole equation, does it not?
It does, and I think that the people in charge of this whole scenario who are actually creating it, it's not that they just know something is going to happen that they have to be armed for. They're creating what's going to happen, and they've modeled it, over decades at least. And one of the things they're planning, along with the damage that they know will happen from geoengineering, is there's about a 100-year-old plan that's nearing completion right now to make sure there's absolutely no purchasing power left in the U.S. dollar. And it's down to about 2% of the value that it had when this program started. But when that finishes, along with the geoengineering wiping out agriculture, which it can certainly do, people wouldn't be able to buy anything even if agriculture could grow it. And they know that's going to happen because they're the ones doing it. So when that happens, they expect people to be upset. They call that civil unrest. And that's why they want to be armed, and the people in control will be sitting offshore watching the whole thing unfold while this war is going on that they have planned. And that's right in front of us now. And I had wondered many times for a long period, what were the people in Germany doing in the 30s when it was so obvious what was about to happen, and they were all, going about their lives and going to the opera and doing these things that they wanted to do. And the answer is just look around. Look at what people are doing now, the vast majority, who is not very aware, and right in front of them, they're loading the guns, on the side of Homeland Security, so-called. And it's because, not that they know something's about to happen, they're doing something that's about to happen, and that's the plan. So if we don't want to have that unfold completely, we need a really good opposite plan to make things better.
That is such an incredibly good point that you bring up. And I read about what were people thinking in Nazi Germany when these things were going on. And I thought about that as a kid when I saw the concentration camps and the whole manner in which it all unfolded. And I remember thinking, how could they not know? How could and being marched off to war with the whole world, how could the German population not know? And as you said very appropriately, look around us. Here we have the same thing, only even worse, because now the stakes are total in that if we continue on the path we're on, we will soon have a planet that will not support life. The data backs up that statement. It truly does. If people look at Venus syndrome, this is what geoengineering is helping to do to the planet. So it is astounding that people can just go on about their lives. We all see them every day because as long as McDonald's is flipping burgers and Walmart's open, everything's great. American Idol's on tonight, grab a bag of popcorn. It's all good. But I would argue that heads are going to be ripped out of backsides soon, very soon, and it's could happen tomorrow. And I think the power structure, I believe, although they've planned a lot, they've certainly had maybe a century or more to plan some of these things that are unfolding now. But I would also argue, like with all empires, their plans are seriously running off the rails because in their arrogance they felt they could control things that cannot be controlled. And now we have populations waking up. We have the internet, which I think threw a big wrench into the works for them. I mean, the ability for people to communicate now. So, again, the best laid plans of mice and men run awry, and I think that's a huge part of the equation right now. So no matter how much they've planned, I think that they are hitting challenges with their plans that are causing the whole structure to fray apart. That's in our favor, but people do need to wake up, and those listening need to help us wake up the sleeping. It's up to absolutely all of us. So we have Russ. You've done a lot. You're doing Monday night shows regularly now, correct?
Yeah, doing Monday night shows, getting people together, coordinating our efforts. Good things happen when people get together. Instead of being torn apart, instead of being suspicious of your neighbor, our goal is to bring people together, start forming relationships and working together to educate people about this and to dispel the fear.
Yeah, because we hear a lot suggestions on GeoWatch of things that we should do, and we appreciate that. We do. We want to hear people's input, but it's also imperative that it's not just what we can do through GeoEngineering Watch. It's up to all of us to pick this ball up and start to run with it, because all is, again, at stake right now. And I feel, based on everything that we're seeing, I don't think they can hide this. I'm very cautious of anything with time frames, but I feel they can't hide the totality of our situation much longer than perhaps a few more months or till the end of the year. And I'm not saying everything ends at that point. I'm not giving any sort of definitive time frame, but I'm saying that whenever that point is, and it would appear it's very close, these converging catastrophes, in the words of James Kunstler, that are closing in on us all, at the point in time there's enough critical awareness, the entire game changes right then, when the public at large realizes that this road led off the end of a cliff, and we are now in free fall to the bottom of the canyon. At the point in time that's realized, the game changes right then and right there. So people shouldn't find comfort in the fact that all their friends and their family seems to be oblivious to what's going on as well, because that won't change the reality we face. Correct, Richard? I mean, you as you see people sort of ignoring this as well, but you're seeing people wake up at the same time too. Is that correct?
Yes, and I think for each individual person, they've come to believe that their power is extremely limited, if anything, and actually the opposite from what I've found so far is the truth. And to begin to realize that and take it back so you can contribute something to what needs to be done, I think each person needs to switch their focus more onto getting themselves in really good condition on every level. You know, your brain is part of your body. You have to clean up your bloodstream and your cells and get yourself detoxified and nourished in the correct ways. Start experiencing health and vitality and strength, and forget about how old you are, because it doesn't matter at all. And that's just a complete myth of the medical system primarily. And we don't even know our potential. So start experiencing that and have the kind of character that you think you would like to see in a movie hero. And it doesn't mean going out and killing people. It means being an example by what you can do and getting your own power and awareness back. Then you can do more.
You can, and people, for example, Richard, I want to talk about you for a minute, because you've made quite a profound difference from behind the scenes. I mean, I feel fortunate to have connected with you, and you've helped the issue of geoengineering tremendously. You made connections and opened up doors for me in South America with Rima LeBeau and General Bert Stubblebine. And from behind the scenes, you have done a tremendous amount of good, and certainly have been focused on the common good for a long time, as is Russ. I mean, I count myself in very good company with both of you. So the amount that each individual can do is profound. It's just a matter of choosing to get up off one's backside and getting engaged. And with the flyers that are available now, we've had a couple great people, one in particular from New Mexico, that has helped us at GeoEngineering Watch to purchase some flyers and we're going to distribute those. A few good people that have helped us keep the door open, so to speak, because we don't advertise on the site. We want to keep it clean, and so good people that have helped, again, us come up with tools to pass out to others, which we do, like flyers. It's much more effective to hand somebody a very well thought out flyer and point at the sky. So the more you practice this, the better you get at it. But quite simply, it's up to all of us to figure out every way that we can help the situation. And with our own connections, we've had people from a member from the New Jersey Department of Health, very, very intelligent man. He's been there 35 years. Has just contacted us. He's working within the department, and he's having to work as a citizen because he's been told by the New Jersey Department of Health that he's been completely shut down in any capacity as an employee, even though he's been there 35 years. So even though these agencies are trying to shut down any effort to bring this to light, we have citizens like, his name is Gary Atala, and putting his job on the line to try to bring this to light because he realizes his job won't matter much longer if this issue doesn't stop. So that's the kind of courage we need. And his brother, Mark Atala, just flew here with me from New Jersey, took a week off of work. He owns a computer firm. He's also throwing himself at this 100% because he understands his job won't matter. His career doesn't deal with this issue. And so it wouldn't take that many people to really commit themselves for us to have a completely different situation. And in the meantime, the media, read one more line from this article from The Guardian. This is where we all need to learn a little bit about the issue so we know when they're scapegoating something. It says the extreme weather from last year is causing real problems for farmers, not only for the UK, but in the U.S., many grain-producing countries. World food production can be expected to decline with mass starvation inevitable. The price of food will rise inexorably, producing global unrest and making food security even more of an issue. Now, this is from mainstream media in reference to the imploding Arctic ice cap, which is disintegrating 100 years ahead of the modeling. But what people need to remember is they blame everything on the global warming equation that Al Gore has painted. This is a lie. This is an absolute lie. I'm not saying humanity hasn't damaged the planet, because we absolutely have. But I'm saying the biggest elephant in the room, which is geoengineering, goes completely ignored by the media while everything is blamed on something else. And this is where people need to educate themselves and understand that this one issue is deciding all of our common fate. So it's up to all of us to bring it to light, all of us, every one of us. Russ, are we going to have can we open up the phone lines for anybody that wishes to call in?
Yeah, absolutely. We can take calls anytime we're ready.
Okay, if anything comes in, I'm sure you'll see that from Jules. But in the meantime, though, any other suggestions, Richard, as far as Richard said correctly, so that we all need to care for our own health and organism, and Rush said too, because if we're not firing on all neurons, we're not going to be much help for this task or anything else. But any other suggestions, Richard, on what people can do to get engaged right now to help the situation, to help bring this to light?
Well, first of all, Dane, I want to make one comment on the point you just made, which was everybody getting themselves in better shape. And I would say, talking to every individual that's listening to us right now, that I want to make an analogy. I think it was Einstein who brought to public awareness that one little tiny grain of matter has enough energy in it to recreate the entire universe. That's a lot of energy. And if it can be accessed, otherwise you just don't even see it. And that's nothing compared to what is inside every single individual. So I would say, make it a priority to find that inside yourself and throw away whatever your preconceptions are right now about what your limitations are, and even how high you can get in all these different areas. Just throw those out, get rid of every trace, and realize that you're completely unlimited. This is the main thing that the rulers of the planet want you never to know, because they would be finished if you found this out. So do whatever you can to get there, and everything else will become apparent, and you'll be such an inspiration to everybody else that you'll know exactly what to do.
Yeah, I mean, you bring up a good point, and it's hard to comprehend, isn't it, that a very few people at the top can actually be wreaking such havoc on the globe, and they always have. And how does this happen? Because so many just stand by and don't realize the power that you just elaborated on. And we think of quotes from brilliant men like Edmund Burke, who said, "The only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing." And Einstein, who I believe said something along the lines of, "It is not evil men who will destroy the world, but those who watch them and do nothing." And that's what it comes down to. So many just seem to feel they have no power, or they have no ability to affect the equation. But I certainly never imagined being in this battle. I never imagined facing this sort of challenge. I'm not political. I've never been an activist of any sort. But simply I found it impossible to look at my children or to look in the mirror. Once I became aware of the situation, I couldn't do anything else. And you have engaged yourself in the same manner, Russ in the same manner. I mean, without people like you guys that have been a huge help in this effort, I mean, it would have been much more difficult to to make the progress we've already made. But I don't think any of us imagined that, if we went back enough years, being engaged in a fight of this gravity. But quite simply, it couldn't be avoided. So it's not like this is something that any of us really wanted to do, but it's just something that has to be done. And I think if people realize that they will not be able to stay in their comfort zones much longer, and that the sooner they come out of them and the sooner they engage in the situation, the better chance we have. I mean, time is of the essence. And I mean, Russ, you, I'm not sure when you first found out about this issue, but is that more or less the course of you becoming involved, that you realized how dire it was and engaged?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't want to be doing this. This is not my life's ambition to do radio shows and to spread information about crimes of government. I have many other things that I would prefer to be doing, but this has to be done. I'm motivated by multiple things, including my own personal suffering, because I suffer from this daily. But I'm very motivated. And by the way, we have a caller who just called in. Do we want to take this call?
Please.
Caller, are you there?
Hi, guys. This is Vince. I wanted to ask you if you'd give a short answer for one's response when they say that it's ice crystals and from hot engines that we're seeing. And I'll hang up and listen to y'all's answer. Thanks.
That's a great question, Vince. I guess we should have covered that earlier on. But the whole contrail, chemtrail controversy is not so complex if people, without any data, you can look up and start to compare when you see a trail going from horizon to horizon, and if you look closely enough, it's common to see a jet at the same approximate altitude leaving nothing. In the Pacific Northwest, we will see heavy spraying during the day, and by 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock at night, it's all gone. A sky that was totally covered, saturated, clears up, and jets can be seen flying over. Much less jets because they're not spraying at night, typically, and they're leaving nothing behind. So if NOAA's original data, National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, stated 70 below 70% humidity necessary for a naturally occurring trail, which should be extremely short-lived and almost transparent. So quite simply, almost all we see, as Russ already alluded to, are particulate trails, not condensation trails, but particulate trails. And again, the example that works for a lot of people is if you're hoofing down the road on a cold day and your breath is condensing, you don't walk a mile, look behind you, and see a trail hanging in the air. Doesn't happen. Condensation doesn't span out and cover the entire horizon at temperatures far in excess of anything that could support even a short-lived trail. So these are particulate trails. They're not condensation trails. NASA would like us to call them persistent contrails. Some people, even within this movement, call them persistent contrails, which is a mistake. Nobody's going to care if it's a short contrail or a persistent contrail if it's a contrail, but it's not a contrail. It's a particulate trail. Go ahead, Russ. Or you got any to add to that, Russ?
Yeah.
Richard?
Yeah, I would love to add to that because what people need to know is mainstream media and the government in large is teaching the public, and even the public school system is teaching the children and the public that these short trails that we're seeing are condensation trails, and they're saying they're normal, and they show the same 5 photographs from the past 40 years. They show the same. Sorry, getting a little feedback here. Getting the same 4 photographs or 5 photographs from the past few decades and say, see, they've been around forever. When I lived in Jamestown, New York, I actually saw where all of the long, persistent chemtrails, the chemical aerosols in the sky, that they were gridding the sky and blocking the sun out every day. Suddenly there was a 4-day break where there was no spraying, and then on the 5th day, all the trails came back. The jets were on the same schedule. They sprayed the same times, except all the trails were short. They were all non-persistent trails, and we only had persistent trails after that date. We only ever had them about 4 to 6 days a month out of the month. This same thing happened to me in Bangor. I now moved to Bangor specifically because they were spraying Jamestown so bad that my health was in trouble. Moved here because it wasn't quite as bad. And after a couple years of spraying, they started spraying hard the year that I moved here. Not because of me, I'm sure. They started at different times in different cities. But I moved here. They started spraying really, really hard in 2008. In 2010, and they would spray every day, cover the sky till it was white out. In fact, Bangor Globe did a news article on it and said that we had the dimmest summer. 2010 was the dimmest summer in history. Overnight, was it a response to the newspaper article? Was it a response to public awareness? I don't know. But overnight, the trails stopped and all turned into non-persistent trails. The spraying schedules were the same. The taste and smell of metals and chemicals in the air were the same. And now, just like we saw in Jamestown, only 4 to 6 days a month do we have persistent trails here. So obviously there was an equipment change, and they are upping their equipment so that the trails are less noticeable to the public, and then they started moving the aircraft to higher altitudes so they're harder to see. So I think these are one of the, and they're also teaching the children, that these short trails are just condensation trails. Well, even the textbooks now, they're teaching the long trails are condensation trails as well. They're also teaching that. So I think we need to be aware of this ploy to try to convince the public that these short trails, I don't deny that contrails exist, but as you spoke earlier, Dane, the conditions where they form are extremely rare. And being a lifelong sky watcher myself, traveling the United States, flying every year as a child, collecting pictures of aircraft, rockets, commercial aircraft, jet aircraft since I was a child, having thousands of pictures, and going to drop zones where they would parachute, because I had paratroopers in my family. None of those occasions, never in my life, even taking flight lessons myself, have I ever seen a trail come out of a jet engine until they started chemical aerosols. Never one time have I ever seen that.
Well, that's a lot to add to the answer, Russ. I mean, thanks for sharing that. That's what people should realize. Almost the entirety of what we see is particulate trails. And Richard, any perspective on that?
I would just, you guys are the experts on that compared to me, but I would just say that the ice crystals that may form as a result of normal exhaust from engines, they don't ruin blue skies, and the solid ones do.
Well, that's a very, very important statement, because anything that's condensation that would form a natural ice crystal would look like a cloud if that was occurring in the manner in which we were being sold it. And you're exactly right. It doesn't ruin blue skies. It wouldn't do what these particulate trails do, and which we can actually see at times hanging like a veil from where the trail was sprayed as these particulates are migrating to the surface of the planet. Another headline from the New York Times from this is 6 days old, only 6 days old, okay? Globe grows darker as sunshine diminishes 10 to 37%. In the second half of the 20th century, the world became quite literally a darker place. Defying expectation and easy explanation, hundreds of instruments around the world recorded a drop in sunshine reaching the surface of the Earth as from 10% to 37% since the late 50s. In some places, the drop is even steeper. Hong Kong, sunlight decreased 37%. Now, again, they act like they have no idea what's doing this. And it's becoming absolutely ludicrous at this point. When geoengineering's sole purpose is to deflect sunlight, and we see it happening. We have the test to confirm it's happening on the ground. The same materials that are being used in the patents are falling on us on the ground. You have headlines now in the New York Times, LA Times, same article. acknowledging the fact that massive percentages of sunlight are no longer reaching the surface, and they just can't figure out what's doing it. And it's getting beyond ludicrous at this point. And we know these programs are shredding ozone. The media is not talking about that yet, even though the ozone layer is so diminished that we're seeing the bark burn off of trees in Northern California. Literally, the trees are dropping their foliage because they can't take the sun. We're seeing trees, native trees in the Pacific Northwest forest, with the leaves so wadded up this spring, they look like they've been hit with a blowtorch. Our situation is absolutely critical, and we still have mainstream media and the quote-unquote scientific community as a whole doing everything they can to hide this issue. And we have on the condensation question, or the contrail question, one step further. In 9/11, when 9/11 happened and all the aircraft were grounded, many people might not know that some very specific studies were done, and they are very profound. They confirmed this heat-trapping layer being laid down by aircraft. In the 2 days following 9/11, daytime high temperatures in the U.S. went up over 2 degrees. So this is absolutely monumental in terms of such a rapid change. And nighttime low temperatures went down, as we would expect, because this layer of particulates that's being used to try to deflect some of the daytime thermal energy from the sun is also trapping thermal energy at night. So it's an overall a net negative and destroying the climate as a whole. But the bottom line is, again, back to the condensation trail. Condensation trails would not have this effect. This is a particulate issue, and that's what people need to understand. So I think we've pounded that question out. Russ, if there's anybody else, let us know if something else comes in on question-wise. And Richard, I know in South America, I mean, you have connections down there, and I think there's quite a bit of awareness happening down in that region too. And there's quite a network down there, correct? It's we're trying to work in conjunction with. I mean, what can you tell people about how things are waking up down there?
Well, you know, some of the people that I'm in contact with down there have actually essentially fled the environment of the United States because they weren't allowed to do what they're doing or say what they're saying, and there was so much repression on expression here, especially in the healthcare community, that is not drug-centered. The Rima Lebow, as you know, who's doing great work with chemtrails and other issues down from Chile, broadcasting here too, was healing people from diseases without using drugs, and that's essentially just about illegal now in the U.S. So she had to go do it somewhere else, and she's surrounded by a group of people who are also becoming very aware, and they realize that the problem is global. One of the reasons they're in South America is that the nuclear problem here, which is also reaching critical mass, is not happening in the southern hemisphere at this moment. And so, you know, one of the other things that the media is not covering is the emergency with the amount of nuclear fallout that we're subjected to every day. And it's not happening in the southern hemisphere yet, but that doesn't mean that it won't get there.
How critical do you think that is? I mean, your perspective on the nuclear issue, and I agree with you fully. Maybe you can go into that a little bit further. I mean, just how bad our situation here is right now from Fukushima, for example.
Yeah, I don't want to distract too much from the geoengineering focus, but
I think it's related, though. I mean, if you can let people know about that, I'll tie it in when you're done. But I mean, I'll connect it to geoengineering. But any thoughts you have on exactly how much threat we face from the nuclear fallout?
Well,
I think just a brief statement.
It's really related to the point you were just making about the media and what impression they're giving of the chemtrails either not existing or not being important. And one thing people need to really realize is that what comes over almost all of the media has no relation to news about anything. They're owned by huge corporations. It used to be relatively not too long ago, a few decades, it was like 30 or 40 corporations controlled all the media, which is bad enough. And now it's like 5. So they are just deciding, the media are their public relations arm to craft the version of reality that they want humans to believe. That's what the news is, okay? It has nothing to do with what's happening in the world. So
that's a good. You can continue in a minute. I just want to highlight that to people what you just said, and it's profoundly important. They are literally crafting people's perception of reality of the world around them. Correct? And keep on. I mean, that's a good point you brought up.
Yeah, I think that really deserves to be deeply understood, because right now, even though there are a lot of people waking up, the vast majority are still consciously and subconsciously believing what the so-called authorities are telling them is true. And what's so hard emotionally to digest for virtually everybody until they can get their arms around the concept is that the so-called authorities that are telling them the truth about everything are almost all lying. I mean, this is in all areas. It certainly is true in my focus in healthcare, which has become the biggest system to keep people sick and dying. And it certainly happened in all, the military, which is supposed to keep us free, is the biggest threat of war because of what they're doing all over the world right now. And the media, which is supposed to tell us the truth, and the news is telling us this incredibly intricate and carefully designed web of lies to give us a view of what reality is so that we can be managed and directed in certain ways. And that's pretty important. And so with respect to the situation with nuclear fallout right now, it would be becoming obvious if we had the real news that nuclear power was an insane idea from the beginning, and that was really obvious. But again, the media was used to make it seem like it was a great scientific advance, and a lot of the scientists who are so totally programmed by their education actually believe that. And Einstein had a comment about nuclear power in the very early stages, and he said it was a hell of a way to boil water, because really that's all it's doing. It's using nuclear fission, which is really a dangerous process, to boil water so that it'll generate steam to turn a turbine to make electricity, just like the generator does in your car without the nuclear power part. And so the real situation right now, which is totally blacked out of the media because it doesn't serve their purpose to talk about it, is that the Fukushima disaster is ongoing. It's gone a long way to destroying the Pacific Ocean as far as making all life forms there radioactive. In my mind, it's not really a good idea to eat anything out of there anymore, which is a huge food supply. And I don't know how it's going to end up affecting the plankton, which are supposed to generate oxygen for the planet. But the air current continuing nuclear emissions from Fukushima directly over the United States and then over Europe, and not yet much into the southern hemisphere, but eventually that will certainly happen. So it's a really serious situation, and virtually every nuclear power plant in the U.S. is already leaking nuclear water and things like that into the environment. And if there's ever a big power outage, which is highly likely because of the predicted solar activity, every one of those plants in the northern hemisphere will melt down at the same time. So I think it's a pretty big issue. And
you bring up, so many good points you bring up, and I'm trying to elaborate on a couple of those. You brought up the great point about Einstein's statement, it's a hell of a way to boil water. And in fact, using this incredibly lethally toxic facility to accomplish this, and I personally worked on, in my electrical background, the first solar parabolic oil heating facility in Daggett, California, which is using simply the sun's light to boil water. It heats oil to 600 to 700 degrees Fahrenheit, and that goes to a central collector. And I mean, this is done without any of this massive toxic risk. So again, the cost of Fukushima, when it comes down to it, we don't know the cost. We will never know the cost. It's incalculable. They're saying 40 years now to shut this plant down. And then back to the plankton situation. And you're right, the plankton populations now globally are down 50%. People need to get their arms around this. 50% decline. This is, as you correctly stated, the Earth's major form of oxygen production. So we have global pelagic fish populations down 93%, and back, as you correctly stated, on the CMEs, the coronal mass ejections or solar flares, and the risk they pose to the planet. And then that's weaving this back into geoengineering. So, because geoengineering has decimated the ozone layer, it's decimated the Earth's natural protection from the sun's solar energy, its solar radiation. So now because they've decimated this ozone layer, if we get a huge CME and it shuts grid patterns down, as you correctly stated, Richard, now we might be looking at Fukushima times 100 or Fukushima times 200. So they're again painting us deeper and deeper into a corner with every passing day with geoengineering. And in relationship to Fukushima, because we see the blanket spraying on the eastern Pacific, which we post satellite shots of most days, they are thwarting the hydrological cycle, and that's keeping that radiation from raining out over the Pacific, so it more effectively migrates over to us here on the U.S. And I think, Richard, they changed, or Richard or Russ, whoever might know, they altered the quote-unquote safe limits on radiation after Fukushima, correct? Because they certainly couldn't stop it, so they just changed the rules, changed the science, right?
So they just raised the limit, so everybody thinks it's safe, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's exactly right. They do that whenever there's something that's not controllable. They just say, now it's officially okay.
We have a guest that's joined the conversation. Are you there, guest?
Yeah, hi guys, great show. Dane just answered my question, though. I was wondering about the sun flares and our ozone being so thin and damaged. So you already answered my question.
Yeah, well, thanks for the question. And the ozone layer alone, and people need to understand that when the sun feels hot on their face, it's because it is. It's not their imagination. It's burning people much, much quicker. The Canadian research team that was really in the front of that issue have been told, if they speak to media, that they'll be terminated, or there'll be consequences, whatever that means. So again, doing everything they can to keep the lump under the rug, and on people's denial, as Richard mentioned earlier, I hope that shatters quickly before there's nothing left safe, because if everybody sits around till their head catches on fire before they realize how dire our situation is, we'll be too late in the game to do anything. And it's getting closer to that point by the day now. But the ozone layer itself is imperative for life on Earth, and it's literally being ripped apart. And people can see this with satellite imagery. We post some of this on GeoEngineeringWatch.org. But Russ, are you feeling when the sky clears up there? Are you feeling the intensity of the ozone?
Yeah, absolutely. The sun, like you said, the sun does feel hotter. I've had a lot of people contact me and say exactly the same thing, Dane.
Dane, in the chat room, they're asking to speak more on the methane problem.
It's literally being ripped apart. Yeah, we can elaborate on that. As I mentioned earlier, the climate feedback mechanisms are...
Yeah, absolutely. The sun, like you said...
I think we're getting a background feeding in, Dodie. You're getting a background audio feeding in. But on the methane situation, the climate feedback loops that have now been triggered, to try to make this as simple as possible, is geoengineering has shredded the ozone layer, thwarted the hydrological cycle, the rain cycle, toxified everything on the ground, so it's thus poisoned the boreal forests, which are the terrestrial lungs of the planet. It has altered wind currents, which has then altered ocean currents. Now we have warm water pumping straight into the Arctic. That's thawing methane hydrate on the sea floor. That's stored methane deposits on the sea floor. Again, the massive amount of methane entering the atmosphere is not from cow flatulence. It's from the type of deposits like we see in the East Siberian shelf of the Arctic. That's fully underway. We believe they're blocking information from getting out about the situation. There was a Russian research vessel on its way there. It was publicized some 6 months ago to observe what was happening on the ground, because the most recent observations we had, they were seeing plumes of methane from the sea floor a kilometer wide, and they were seeing thousands of these plumes. The sea was literally boiling with methane. Methane will enter the atmosphere, and it covers the planet like a layer of glass. Thermal energy gets in, doesn't get out. So again, how does this happen? Because if they've shredded ozone, so more of the sun's thermal energy penetrates. We're about to lose the Arctic ice cap 100 years ahead of schedule, according to a lot of the modeling. And this is where people were right about the modeling of some of these climate organizations. It is wrong. It's very wrong. The modeling Al Gore showed was wrong. But it's wrong in the other direction, the opposite direction of what people think. It's far short of how dire it really is. And so, again, Al Gore... shows that his ability to muddy the water and be a hypocrite and not paint a clear picture, not mention the major reason why a lot of this is happening. But again, as the ice is lost, more of the sun's thermal energy is absorbed by the darker ocean surface instead of being reflected by the light surface of the ice. It's about a 90% equation. Instead of 90% of the sun's thermal energy being reflected by the ice, 90% is absorbed. That heats the ocean. The altered currents heats the ocean. The methane releases. That hits the atmosphere. That heats the ocean even more. It's called a feedback loop. And now, as the methane's releasing, which is, again, a global game-changing event, I believe the methane issue is the issue that they cannot hide for much longer. It's directly related to the ice implosion in the Arctic. It's a planetary. It's a planetary changing event, and now that this methane's releasing and heating the planet, and they're trying to spray even more to compensate for this, which is painting us even further into a corner. Now the heating that's already occurred has started to release methane from other places around the globe. It's releasing from the eastern seaboard. It's been releasing from the Bermuda Triangle region for a very long time. That's what sinks the ships. And now there's some recent data that indicates there may be very significant methane hydrate deposits in Antarctica, which was thought not to be the case. So on the methane issue, the walls are closing in very, very quickly. And I believe that if geoengineering isn't stopped and the climate allowed to respond, that we will remain on a track that will lead us to a point where the planet won't support life. The planet must be allowed to respond in its own way. And again, we were much warmer. 5 million years ago, the planet was much warmer, perhaps 10 to 12 degrees warmer than it is now during the Pliocene epoch. But the planet was very lush and vibrant because it was raining a lot everywhere. Western U.S. was raining a tremendous amount. It was much lusher than it is now. But now we're fed this garbage that says with climate change, the Western U.S. is going to dry out. Well, that's absolutely wrong based on physics, based on previous examples for conditions that were much warmer than now. And it's simply being fed to us so that we think it's part of this natural process that areas dry out. And they're drying out because of the geoengineering spraying, because of the particulates. So, again, as Russ said, as Richard said, the media feeds us reasons for things, lies, that make people believe things are happening for one reason when, in fact, they're happening for another reason. But the methane situation is absolutely dire, no question.
Dane, we've got a caller.
Yeah.
Caller, you there?
Hi, is this me?
Yep, you're live.
Hi, it's Miss Maddie Lynn calling in from the chat room. I had a question about core exit and the cleanup of the Gulf. I had heard that because of the fact of what the core exit was made of and the fact that it broke the oil down into such small pieces, that the core exit and the oil could be actually evaporated with the water and distributed all over the earth in rain. Can you guys address that at all? Know anything about it?
I can. Richard, if you have any particular take on that, you can elaborate, or I can, or Russ, you either. I can't hear you, Richard. If you're off, your audio might be off. I can't.
Richard,
can't get Richard.
Richard, try again. You're not getting your audio. Try again, Richard.
No, would be, but I don't think oil evaporates like that. So it may have just been picked up in the wind or that sort of thing. But I know Corexit by itself travels long distances, and it was also sprayed partly over the land intentionally, for whatever reason that is. And so those things have spread, and they've spread through the currents up the East Coast to some degree. How far, I don't know, but it's definitely something that should never have been released into the environment.
No, it never should have. And on some of the effects that we believe also related to the Corexit, when they went to great length to suppress any significant cyclonic rotation in the Gulf since the oil spill, because that would have stirred everything up. So we saw hurricanes that should have formed, tried to form, but were knocked down with aerosols. And incidentally, when the planet's trying to spin up these cyclones, it's trying to cool itself, and it's being hindered from that, because according to Discovery Channel, the U.S. Ramped up its hurricane suppression programs again after the brutal 2004-2005 season, and so again, by hampering the Earth's natural systems, it's completely thwarting the whole hydrological cycle. And in the case of the Corexit in the Gulf, it appeared that they went to great effort to make sure nothing stirred up that big mess of oil that's sitting at the bottom of the Gulf. And anything with the Corexit breaking things up, it would be logical that this would make it more likely for this toxin to be picked up and spread everywhere with rain. So I would say the answer is yes. I believe that did happen. I believe Corexit, again, that's why it made, according to the report I read, 52 times more toxic. So it didn't really correct much in that regard. Little problem with your audio, Richard. We didn't catch quite the beginning of all that, but anyway, I think we got...
Yeah, caller, is there any other part of your question? Or
No, I think that covered it. Thank you very, very much.
Yeah, thank you for calling in. Thank you.
Russ, on your conference calls, I mean, are your the groups that are on there? I think they're sensing an increasing feeling of, or they're increasingly feeling urgent about the situation here. I think the awareness there is rising quite rapidly with your group. Yes.
Yeah, the awareness is rising, the urgency is rising, and it's partly because they have ramped up in the last several weeks or few months. They have ramped up the spraying program so that people are really feeling it. They're really feeling it.
Yeah, it is getting worse. I think on overall, Richard, you said you've had a few blue skies, but just the silvery white down your way?
Yeah, it's really heavy spraying up here most days, and I think there are more people being aware of it, but most of them have no idea what they can possibly do about it. And I know there's a small group that's actually meeting later today. I'm going to try to go to that meeting if I can, and they have tried in the past to bring it to local governments. And what's really interesting to me is that the organization to deny this, which is organized from the very top, I'm sure, has reached down into the local levels to where city councils and county boards of commissioners that normally should be regular people that can communicate about things are all saying almost uniformly that none of this exists. Very, very intensely, and it's almost like they've been trained. And it makes me wonder, how is that level of coordination even possible? There are thousands of localities, and they all seem to be coming out with a vehement denial that any of this is real.
You know, in relating this to our local situation here in Shasta County, Northern California, and I got this in front of the supervisors or the Air Quality Board in 2008, and they managed to squash it there again. And knowing a lot of the characters involved, in our case here, it was simply a matter of people who don't want to be bothered. They feel they have enough problems to deal with, and this is just one they don't want to take on. So they collaborated, and in the course of a meeting where the data was being presented, they made sure that they had the last speaker up who blatantly lied, who tried to imply that it would cost the county $1 million to test for aluminum. Aluminum test in rain is $20. So, I mean, the lie couldn't have been much bigger, and that statement shut the whole process down, and that was that. So, I mean, knowing a lot of the players in county government and city government here locally have just simply decided they have enough details in their lives, they don't want to deal with this. But now that the forest is imploding here, now that trees are flashing out dead everywhere, the lake is dropping, we're in record drought, and the whole county tourism situation is imploding by the day, because that's really a mainstay for the county. You know, now they're starting to listen, but it's taken it to get to a point where we're absolutely, again, in free fall before they've decided that maybe they'll take a look at it. It has to affect them in a very direct way. But the problem is, once it's at this stage, it's very hard to begin to reverse. Right now, if we could stop the geoengineering programs, there would likely be a horrific bounce back in the climate. It's like they've kept a toxic lid on a boiling kettle while stoking the fire underneath. And I think, again, as every day that passes, we're in for a much worse situation. So time is of the essence for everybody. And any Richard, suggestions on people's options for trying to help us bring this to light?
Well, one remains that each person needs to improve their own health and awareness of things around them and look at their own attitudes and make sure they're really open to wanting to know what's true, even if it's difficult. And that's part of health, in my opinion, is just to teach yourself how to do that. But as far as specifics that can be done, one interesting possibility, and there's a lot of questions connected with this, but with our so-called representatives, at least in the United States, it is possible, apparently, sometimes to put so much pressure on them that it's uncomfortable for them to keep totally ignoring certain important things. And I can mention that site where the action item on chemtrails is, Dane, if you think that's relevant.
Yes.
It's one thing that people could do. The friend of mine that you mentioned, whose name is Rima Lebeau, who's working out of Chile right now, who's a doctor from the United States, is working on many of these issues, and that includes chemtrails. And she's put up a site, and it's reachable at, I don't have a way to put it on the chat room myself, but it's www.healthfreedomportal.org. I don't know if you can type that in, Ross, or if you have access to it. But the point is, if you go there, there's a section of that very informative site that is called Action Items. And one of those is a pre-written letter that if you put in your zip code, it sends this letter to every representative connected with you simultaneously and free. It's very quick. And if you want to edit the letter to make it personalized from you, you can do that too. There's no cost. And she has used this system to stop some government programs that were very destructive, that looked like they couldn't be stopped, and she got millions of emails that just overwhelmed the agency or the representatives connected. And I think this is one thing that really should be done. So everybody should take advantage of that site, and you can do the same thing with other issues they have there just as easily. It takes seconds to do each one. The other thing is that locally, wherever you are, it's possible for groups of people to get together and meet with local representatives just in case there's any of them that are still coherent or open to actual communication. And I would like to see somewhere where a locality gets the courage and willingness to do something either with lawsuits or passing local ordinances that ban the dumping of toxins from high altitudes over their county, and then see how far that could go. And I think this is a valid use of people who have graduated from law school, instead of just, suing people at random and making money when things difficult. Why not use your skills to see how legal actions could be taken against government or corporate entities that may be keeping these planes in flight, so that at least we exhaust administrative remedies, as they say, and look for example, a person that I know named Clint Richardson is a great investigative reporter and is good at reading and analyzing government documents that are written to not be understood, at least by the general public. He found that the spraying in chemtrails, he thinks require consent of the public, because it's that the government is not allowed to do dangerous chemical and biological experiments on the population. Now that's as far as they publicize. It sounds great. And then the next part is, unless there is some scientific reason or this whole list of things that give them carte blanche to do anything they want, including dumping poison on all.
Having trouble with your audio, Richard. I keep losing you.
All of us is public.
Russ? Okay, there you go. It's coming and going, though. Can you hear him, Russ, okay?
He's coming. I heard most of what he said. He's going out a little bit. Keep trying, Richard. I think we'll have you on in a sec if you push. Keep going a little bit.
I'm saying that what Clint Richardson came up with in his investigation is that some form of public consent for being poisoned is required for them to be able to legally do it, so-called legally. And the form of informed consent that they're using is obscure public notices that are put out in places we would never find, that if nobody responds to them, they assume that legally that's informed consent so they can kill us. And the idea was that if people with a legal background would like to look into how this mechanism of informed consent is being used, it's possible that that could actually be shut down so that at least their legal ability to do this in harmony with the U.S. Code could be stopped. And that's just one issue that could be worked on.
We do have a caller.
Hey, guys, a great show. This might be a dumb question, but I just want to know what stops us from having the planes checked by some kind of authority. We know the flight numbers, we know where they're landing and taking off, and we have the evidence, the physical evidence. So I'm just wondering, what's the next step?
If I can put a little connection on this to what Richard said too, your question, Carl. Thanks for the question. It's a great question. What allows them to do this, and one of the major mechanisms they use is the fact that this is considered perhaps the greatest U.S. strategic threat of all. In fact, an article from about a month ago, head of U.S. Pacific Forces, quote, "Climate change is biggest threat to region security." You had articles in Forbes magazine where representatives from the Pentagon stated that climate change was the greatest threat to U.S. security. This is a national security issue, so any attempt to search planes that they are encompassing under this umbrella, I think would be completely thwarted based on this criteria alone. And it's a paradox that these programs are fueling the climate change and climate disintegration, and yet they're too heavily invested. They won't turn back. They just want to double down and increase the spraying even more, and we simply have to bring this to light. But I think that's what would keep them from allowing any sort of searches to occur, the fact that they consider this a U.S. security issue. And on that note, we have headlines. I'm looking at articles now. Drought stalks the global food supply. That's a recent article. World crisis, the geopolitics of food scarcity. You have global food production dropping. That's another one. Catastrophic fall in global food production. So you have literally, these issues all are wrapped up into what could be put under the blanket of national security, so they can basically do what they want at that point. And even though they're making the problem worse with what they're doing, I think they would thwart any effort to search those planes until we get it to a large enough level of awareness where people are perhaps unwilling to accept no for an answer, where agencies, governmental agencies, and people in those agencies most specifically realize that their life is at stake as well, so they won't so easily back down from any refusal to search those planes. And we did hear there was a plane grounded in a spray plane in, God, it was Africa several years ago, maybe Zimbabwe or somewhere, and of course the U.S. military got involved with that immediately and somehow covered up that situation. So they're very determined. They're very, very determined to press on with this. And as scientists like Ken Caldera, who David Keith, I've been face to face with, I've communicated with Ken Caldera, but these guys live in some sort of alternate reality, and they're the sort of people that feed data to the military-industrial complex that, yeah, you can do this, no problem, it's fine, won't hurt anything. Completely as far from the truth as it could be, but yet you have a military-industrial complex that is determined to support its individual contractors and determined to have full-spectrum dominance in their own words and their own documentation. So it's a runaway juggernaut of insanity, and I think until we raise public awareness to the point where those participating in these programs, their families, their friends, realize what they're participating in, we have to get it to that point to sort of stop the system from the inside out, if that makes sense.
Caller, you still there? Caller, all done. Okay. All right.
But Russ, your thoughts on that, or Richard, that the fact that this system has to be stopped from the inside out, and sometimes you hear people making comments that are inappropriate as far as some direct or method of opposing these programs, and it simply isn't going to happen that way. It has to be by reaching the people involved and making them understand what they're participating in. It has to be brought to a halt from the inside out.
And it seems to me, Dane, that maybe one of the very effective avenues for doing that is using public pressure. We've seen public pressure work many times before, but if we can get, with many other issues, but if we can get enough people who will, then they no longer can, we approach public officials, when we approach public officials, they can no longer ignore the information that they give them. I've approached some public officials myself, and they're kind and polite, and then they just stop responding to me, and they don't want to hear about it anymore. So I think reaching out to the public may be part of the first step of gaining the political clout that we need to put pressure on these people on the inside to actually become active and responsible for this.
You know, it takes, when something affects them. I just had a 2-hour meeting with a county supervisor here in Shasta County, and now we're at the point where the forests are literally burning down and dying, and now the county's revenue from tourism, which is its main source, is falling. It's going to fall apart completely. The lakes down in Lake Shasta, which is a huge tourist attraction, it's going down rapidly. There's no water, there's no rain, the forest's dying, the animals are gone, and now, of course, they're starting to listen. It's sad that it has to reach that point, but it in fact has reached that point, and I don't know if there's any turning it around. We certainly have to try, but hopefully it won't have to reach that point in other regions, other zones. But if we could just get this on the radar, and Richard made suggestions too as far as bringing people together. In the Northern California region, a lot of food production, and a lot of those farmers now realize something's horrifically wrong, and they're willing to gather in mass to try to, as Richard said, put some sort of legislation on the radar. There is a huge cooperation across many different political lines and political perspectives to come together on this issue, because all is at stake. So we may in fact see some media event involving farmers from regions all over Northern California coming together to insist that this issue be dealt with. So we will hope that we do, in fact, reach that point, because we have agencies like California Air Resources Board now. They're penalizing the farmers, making the farmers buy new equipment that the farmers can't afford. It's breaking their backs financially in order to try to reduce particulate matter, while the same agency is turning two blind eyes to this constant spraying, which is a source of particulate pollution 100 or perhaps even 1,000,000 times greater mathematically. So it's completely off the rails again on many fronts. And I spoke to a California Fish and Game agent, a biologist actually, several days ago, who informed me that they have tests that are done by anybody who puts anything into a waterway. These tests have to be done consistently. It's called a waste discharge test. They have to test for everything you can imagine except aluminum. Imagine that. So they don't have to test for aluminum on these runoff tests anymore. California Water Quality quit testing for aluminum in the drinking water in 2002. None of these things are accidents. I mean, they've been planning for this for so long, and the states are all beholden to the federal government to keep their head above the waterline. California's getting probably $30-40 billion a year to keep its head above water, so they simply can't say anything or they lose their money.
And Dane, the fact that this is a coordinated effort, the fact that they're saying you are not going to test for aluminum, shows that there is an active cover-up, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, that's the one element that they don't have to test for anymore, and that they historically did test for. So, yeah, the red flags are they're everywhere. They're absolutely everywhere. So it's a matter of everyone trying to get up to speed on this issue. It's important that people educate themselves before they try to communicate to others or arm themselves with good data. And on that note, I think what Richard mentioned. Did you get that website that Richard went over? Did that come through clear in the audio so we can post that? As far as how to use the mailing system from the people, Rima LeBeau?
I believe it came through the audio, and I think it was posted in the chat as well. Go ahead, Richard.
You can repeat it if you want. It's www.health, H-E-A-L-T-H, freedom, F-R-E-E-D-O-M, portal, P-O-R-T-A-L.org. And if you read through that website, you get to where it says action items, one of which is specifically for sending out letters to representatives on chemtrails. And there are others equally worth looking at. I would really suggest that everybody support what that group is, because it definitely ties right into geoengineering.
Yeah, I think that mechanism is a great tool to use for getting the word out. No question. And also on the flyers, we are posting on geoengineeringwatch.org. There's flyers. Some were done by some people in Arizona.